Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm doing two videos. Well, I did the fall of Constantinople, which that video is already up, should already be up. But before I had already researched we did the Crusade, the Albigensian Crusade. Well, I was researching other crusades and kind of seeing what we could do, and that brought us to the People's Crusade and the Children's Crusade, which were two crusades that happened before the First Crusade, which is in 1096. Pope Urban II calls the council, which proclaims that all Christians need to all Christians need to undergo an armed pilgrimage to Jerusalem to defend the Holy Land. But the thing is, he had planned this for August. So there was a plan, there was a plan in place to go do this. But unfortunately, some people got together and went before him, and it did not work out so great. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be discussing mainly the People's Crusade, and then by extension, the Children's Crusade, because they happened. Which the Children's Crusade happened at the same time as the Crusade against the Cathars, which is kind of funny. But the People's Crusade happened in 1096 when the first crusade was called. This was like a pre-crusade that did not go so well, but we're gonna get into it. Please like and subscribe. Turn the notification bell on if that's something you want to do. But yeah, we're gonna get into it, guys. All right, guys. So in 1096, Pope Urban II, I think it's Urban II, calls Urban II calls the Crusade, and he calls it for August. But some people can't wait. That brings us to one of the guys who can't wait, Peter the Hermit. Bring him in, Peter the Hermit, whatever he might look like or so. So Peter, what a great guy! Sounds like an awesome commander, right? I'm sure he did great. But no, so we had Peter the Hermit. He went around and started, kicking up all this religious fervor to go now, go now, go now. So they were kind of grabbing everybody up, and this is what in France and Germany, both the People's Crusade and the Children's Crusade were movements that largely happened in Germany and France. They obviously moved to Jerusalem, to the Holy Land, but that's where they started. So in 1096, where in April he's going, this Peter the Hermit is going around and kicking fervor up, and there was a lot of sympathetic ears, I should say, or something. People that had just went through a lot of hardships. You had there was just a famine. The crops weren't good that year. So many, my myriad of hardships have, and I mean, it's just a tough time to be alive. So, someone comes around preaching about, hey, we're gonna go take the Holy Land and da 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 da. You get some hope and you want to go now. So he kind of kicked all this up, and they got around 10,000 or 100. They kicked up to about 100,000 people, in total. But as we're going to talk about, these groups split off and went at different times. So Peter the Hermit, as he was collecting people, went to the rubble, and like people split off from him and stuff. There's three to four people we're going to talk about that led these forces, these group of 100,000 that were split into groups of like 10 to 20,000 people. None of these people were armed. Well, some of them were. I don't want to say none of them. But for the most part, these were untrained peasants. But there were lowly knights. They did have commanders, which did have, there were some retinues of knights and things like that that did go along with it. But this didn't have like the official church backing from the Pope like the other ones did, because obviously he said to wait and then meet up around August. But we're in April. He's kicking all this up. So uh, we have Peter the Hermit, Walter Sans of Voix. Walter Sans of Voix. He's a he's a lord, French lord that he becomes one of the commanders of the forces that split off, and he actually doesn't want to wait for Peter the Hermit. So he takes 10 to 20,000 guys and he starts heading towards Byzantium, Constantinople, he starts heading in that direction to cross the Bosphorus to get into the Holy Land. You had two routes of travel to get to the Holy Land. You could go by sea, which was really dangerous and fraught. The ships could like capsize and everyone could die, or you could go through overland to Jerusalem through. They were very nervous, and it kind of goes to show like at this time when they showed up, like they were treated kind of like they were kind of held at arm's length, and they weren't given any help or any supplies. And they actually, I think they raided the countryside there. We're talking about Sons of War and his little army of 10 to 20,000 people that just kind of go off and start. They they just that's where we're gonna leave them. We're gonna leave them pillaging the countryside near Constantinople for supplies. But let's go back to Peter the Hermit in France, and he has Amicho and Volkmar. Some interesting character names. These are two other people that end up leading force contingents of their own. But they don't head right for the Holy Land. They stop and they commit some massacres. And that's what we're gonna get into next. We're gonna talk about the Rhineland Massacre. Yay. I don't know if you tell me in the comments if you like when I recap at this point, or if I'm just shoving it down your throats at this point. But as we're recapping, 1096, Pope Urban II calls for the Crusade. As to recap, this is 1096. Pope Urban calls for a crusade, but he says to wait till August. People aren't waiting. We got Peter the Hermit, we got Sansovar, we got Amicho, Walter Sansovar, we got Anicho and Volkmar. We have, they're going around collecting 100,000 people. Sons of War does not want to wait, takes 10 to 20,000, goes off to the countryside to Constantinople, starts taking people's shit. Okay, so we have like 70 to 80,000 people in the Rhineland, which is in Germany, and they commit the Rhineland Massacre, which is. The Rhineland Massacre was in spring and summer. They wanted to meet up in August, which is later in the year. But in spring and summer, you have Peter and their 70, 80,000. They decide to just start massacring the Jews in the Rhineland, which is the Rhineland Massacre was like 12,000 Jews. They go city to city and just start specifically killing all the Jews, which it's like the Crusade was supposed to be against the Muslims. Well, any heretics, but you're missing the point here, guys. You're missing the point here. And it's like it goes to show how greed kind of shows in the political aspect of it. They just wanted their stuff. And that's why they killed them. But they had split up into groups. You had Peter the Hermit, who famously he rode a donkey and wore like very simple clothing. Like that's what his thing was he wasn't going to be a big commander, even though he was. But Zanzibar left. You had Ochima, what the fuck? Emicho and Volkmar. Emicho is, I think, the lieutenant. Volkmar takes his own group, and they keep massacring and everything into like Poland and Hungary, and they actually get killed by the Hungarians. The Hungarians see that they're massacring all the Jews, and they just wipe them out. So those 10,000 people are wiped out. That's Volkmar. So Volkmar kind of takes his group as they're killing all the Jews. He takes his own group to go kill the Jews over here and gets wiped the fuck out. But they stopped the massacres after that. They didn't stop. I'm sorry. They stopped killing. They were like forced to stop because the clergy and the nobles of everywhere condemned it. Everyone was like, "Bro, what the fuck are you doing?" Some of the massacres were in Worms, Mainz, Trier, Metz, Cologne, in Hungary, like in Cologne. That's where Volkmar gets taken out. A significant thing here is in Speyer, a local bishop had saved. He hid all of the Jews. Um, so only 12 got killed, but Christian Catholic didn't have to do that. Chose to go out of his way to save the people because he saw it was unjust. W's in the chat for him. But after that, as we were talking about, the army split, but they start to meet up now for a little bit. So the Sons of War, Walter Sons of War, they cross the Bosphorus and they wait there, and then the rest of the French come. Damn it! Oh. So they're waiting there, and then the rest of the French under Peter the Hermit come because Volkmar gets taken out. The so Peter the Hermit comes with his forces, and they meet up right in the Anatolian Peninsula, and they start taking stuff and they start fighting. But very quickly, it's fine. Very quickly, an argument breaks out between the French and the German, and they go their separate ways, which leads to disaster, as we will talk about. Alright, guys. So, as we talked about, are in Constantinople, they had all met up after, they had split off and done their own thing. Volkmar got taken out, but the other two, Walter Sons of War and Peter the Hermit's forces, meet up in Constantinople and are ferried across the Bosphorus, and they start pillaging and taking towns. But very quickly, an argument breaks out between the French and the Germans, and they go their separate ways again, and this leads to disaster. So they were in two separate camps, and French forces went and captured some of the countryside of Anatolia. And not to be outdone, the German troops go to Zaragoza, Zaragordos, a town, and they siege it, capture it, and they take it and capture it. But very quickly, Seljuk Turks send like a 20,000 army to then siege them. And they are very quickly, I mean, it takes like a month. They are sieged and starved, and then they are all killed and massacred. The survivors escape back to Constantinople. But the French camp heard nothing about this going on. So, as that was happening, and after it happened, they had sent two Turk spies were sent to the camp to say that, hey, the Germans just took Zaragoza. You guys are going to be outdone. You got to get there. You got to get there quick. And and then when everybody goes, they get ambushed on the road as soon as they leave. Nicomedia, something like that. Somewhere right in the Anatolian heartland, right after. They didn't make it far from Byzantium. They damn sure didn't make it to the Holy Land. But yeah, they were quickly wiped out. And anybody who wasn't wiped out in that retreated back to Byzantium, like the ones, and they joined in the First Crusade. But that's that's what happens when you put the horse before the cart before the horse. You get wiped the fuck out. That's kind of the People's Crusade. Just an interesting thing to touch on, I think. Obviously everybody likes to talk about all the big crusades and things like that, but I think it's very interesting to take a second and stop and look at these little things that were kind of cool. I mean, interesting for the times and what happened, but that brings us into what we're going to talk about next. This kind of add on at the end, which is the Children's Crusade, which isn't really a big thing within itself. So that brings me into our next topic, as we were talking about. I figured I'd kind of group these two together because they're not really big enough to talk about on their own, but we just that's the People's Crusade, and that brings us to the Children's Crusade, which happened like 200 years later. Happened at the same time that the Cathars were being crusaded against. And what this was like it sounds like Children's Crusade. What does that sound like? A child claimed to have a vision from God, and new historical evidence shows that there were two groups of children crusaders, because if you look up this topic and talk about it, it'll kind of say like either this camp is right or this camp is right. But as I've come to discover, both camps are right. They were just two separate movements at the same time. So you had one movement in Germany and one movement in France where kids swear. Well, the kid in Germany just swore that he had visions that they were going to go convert all the Muslims peaceably. They were going to go peacefully convert all the Crusaders. The boy in France claimed to have a letter for the king from Jesus himself that pretty much said the same thing. But yeah. But so they went around gathering children up, and the German one, they went the overland route until they got to Genoa, and the Genoese officials kind of saw their spunk and they all offered them citizenship, and like most of the kids just took that, or they were turned back to their parents, and that was kind of the end of that. I think like a small force did go on to Jerusalem, but the French one, is a little different because they claimed that they were going to get to where the water meets the sea, and the sea was going to part, and they were going to walk the whole way to Jerusalem, and it was just going to work out. So very, I guess that's what kids have that, and I guess it's commendable, very commendable. But and the way they survived was begging and everything, so they were kind of a nuisance everywhere they went. But the French ones, they went through the Alps, which, if you know anything about when Hannibal went through the Alps to kind of get the better of the Roman Empire, he lost like half of his fucking troops. So they lost a lot of kids going through the Alps, but and they made it on the other side. Obviously, when they got to the bottom of France or the bottom of Italy, the sea didn't part, so they negotiated with a trader who was then going to take them the rest of the way, and everything was going to be great, and blah blah blah. And they paid money to these guys. They like sat and raised money to then pay these traders, who then sold them into slavery. Besides the ones that died off of a shipwreck coast, or died in a shipwreck, the other ones were sailed right to Tunisia and sold into slavery. So it was not a good ending to the Children's Crusade. Children's Crusade. Nobody fought and died, but very interesting. Oh, and the kid whose fought the father whose kid was the one that led the France one. The father was hung because all of the townspeople were pissed off that all their kids got taken away, convinced, and left with that guy's kid. So they all got together and hung him. Which, yay, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, that's the People's Crusade and the Children's Crusade. I figured I'd cover this topic. I already did the research for it. Kind of figured you guys might like to hear it. So, if you made it this far, I'd like to thank you. I appreciate it. Take a second, subscribe, like, um, let me know what you think of the video. Let me know if say like the recaps. I think I might be recapping too much. My thing is, too many people go too fast and cover it only one time, so it's like you don't even learn anything about it. So I just really want to cover something to where the person feels like they learned something at the end of it. But yeah, so that's the end of that. Like and subscribe, and see ya.